Hi Shane, how you doing today, mate?
Hey Todd, I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well. From chatting off air, one of a mutually favourite book of ours is Simon Sinek's Start With Why, and I love starting the podcast by finding it out why it is that people do what they do. So, why do you do what you do, and how has it led to what you're currently doing?
Well, I started off as a Taekwondo instructor. I got my black belts while I was in first year in college, and there was no school in the city I was studying in. So I decided to bite the bullet and open up that school as a fresh-faced 18-year-old. 26 years later, I'm still teaching because I absolutely fell in love with it. And after I graduated university, I just didn't really want to do anything else except instruct. And a few years ago, I kind of just fell into the role of strength conditioning. I had been a reasonably successful competitor in Taekwondo in my younger years. And a friend of mine who was my physical therapist as well for years had encouraged me to write about my success because I was still competing with young adults, 18, 19, 20 years of age, even though I was in my mid to late 30s. So he said, Shane, you need to write about this and what you've done to maintain the longevity in your career as a competitor. So I did that. And so I self-published the book and it got some attention locally. And next thing you know, I was being invited to work with some local GA, that's Gaelic football and hurling teams. And I realized very quickly I had quite a lot of gap in my knowledge in terms of, speed and agility and working with maybe teams in a weight room and so on. So I passed on the first opportunity, but I asked for a bit of time and I went and I got myself certified as an S&C coach here in Arent. And I went to every single workshop I could get to, likes of Duncan French, Kelvin Giles, got to do workshops with Dan John, and I don't know if I mentioned Mike Boyle. And it gave me a really, really, really good broad view of strength and conditioning. And I've just been studying and working in that field ever since. And all the stuff I've learned as a martial arts instructor has really intersected with what I can do as a strength and conditioning coach.
That's awesome. And how, going down the martial arts route, so I used to box and my sort of love from strength and conditioning comes from being a failed athlete. What lessons have you learned from martial arts that are key to your coaching practices, whether that's teaching Taekwondo yourself or just in simply strength and conditioning?
I think one of the key things I learned is perseverance. Most of the time we don't succeed first go. And, you might have heard that, success is built in failure. Well, this is absolutely true. But, I think lack of perseverance is one of the biggest reasons for people not achieving what they want to achieve. Just dropping the head and giving up far too soon. So it's actually one of the 5 tenets of Taekwondo is perseverance. And I think just sticking with it, stick with it. I always say to my students in Taekwondo, the only reason why somebody doesn't achieve black belt is just not persevering. Yeah, sure, they might not practice enough, whatever, but at the end of the day, to really fail at it, they have to give up.
Yeah.
They stick in the environment long enough, they get sick of being at the belt they're on, and they progress. So perseverance, that would be the big one.
Brilliant. And just out of interest, what are the 4 others?
Courtesy is number 1. Integrity, self-control, and indomitable spirit. And I'm proud to say that the founder of Taekwondo, General Chae Hong-hee from Korea, he always said that if you're not embodying the tenets of Taekwondo in your training, you're not really doing Taekwondo. I like to maybe just punching, kicking, but the do in Taekwondo is all about the spirit. It's about how you conduct yourself. It's about the philosophy.
I think that's absolutely brilliant because a lot of people who aren't from a coaching background just look at coaching and say, oh, well, you're just getting kids hot and sweaty or running around and, oh, that's nice. And it's certainly somebody's got to do it, but it's almost looked down on to say, oh, it's only coaching. Do you think there's a certain snobbery within strength and conditioning, perhaps? For example, most people who go to university to study sports science, strength and conditioning typically say, I want to work with the elite athletes. And it's almost like, for example, working with youth then leads you to the 21s or 23s. And then there's the sort of pinnacle with the elite of the elite. Do you think that a snobbery does exist? And if so, why do you think this snobbery or this idea that that's the way the progression pathway goes exists?
I'm sure it exists, but I wouldn't pigeon it to strength conditioning. I think there's snobbery in every profession, and that's just because we're dealing with human beings and we're flawed. And, you know, I'm sure at some point somebody could have accused me of being, you know, maybe aristocratic in training or whatever. I hope not, but it's possible, you know. But the way I see it is that, especially here in Ireland, when we don't have many professional sports here. So it's much more difficult to choose, you know, who you work with, or you'd have a very, very small training population, you know. Compared to the UK, where you've got cricket, you've got such a massive soccer, you know, network and all the different leagues and so on, right up to the Premier League, you know, semi-professional as well, all the rugby clubs, you know. Here it's Gaelic football and hurling, which are two amateur sports, but if you get to play for your county, you train like a professional. But apart from that, you know, we've the FAI and the rugby. That's pretty much it, you know. So we don't get to choose really how many athletes we're going to get to work with, you know. So I'll be honest with you. My attitude is, I'll give you a good example. I have a parent who trained with me when I opened up the school first, and he never made it to black belt with me. But a few years ago, he brought his child to me. So I think if you're going to gauge your success as an instructor or a coach, you know, whatever terminology you want to use, look and see what your athletes think of you in 20 years after you finished coaching them. That's the real gauge of a successful coach, in my opinion. I've got a guy who didn't get to black belt with me for whatever reason, but he's bringing his child to me 20 years later to train her. I can't think of a better compliment.
Oh, absolutely.
I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reason I ask is because in a previous episode with Rob Anderson, he gave an analogy I really liked. And he's used teaching. And he said, nobody says to a primary school teacher, so when are you going to teach secondary? And nobody says to a secondary school teacher, so when are you going to teach university or college? Yet, for some reason, in S&C, if you tell people who aren't from a strength and conditioning background, oh, I coach, I don't know, the under 18s or whoever it is. So when are you going to coach the under 21s? When are you going to be in the first team? So that's the reason why I asked that, because I always find it interesting talking to people both in strength and conditioning and out of strength and conditioning, whether or not we're done a disservice or people understand the complexities working with kids rather than just saying, oh, it's just children.
It's actually a brilliant analogy. And in fairness, I wouldn't dream of taking away from coaches that are working with elite athletes.
No, absolutely not.
We need them there. But we also need fantastic coaches working with the underage. Because here's the thing, you can do far more with the young athletes than you can do as they get older. You can have more influence on their cognitive development. You can have more influence on their social development. You know, did you know that 95% of your personality is formed by the age of 7?
I know a lot of things happen around 7, but certainly not that much.
You know, so yeah, Aristotle, I think it was Aristotle that says, quote me if I'm wrong, but he said, give me a child for so many years and I'll show you a man, you know?
Yeah, it's something like, funnily enough, I was watching I wish I could remember the name of the documentary, but it was on BBC lately, and they're looking at child psychology and how the brain develops, and the quote was something along the lines of, show me the boy at 7 and I'll show you the man, basically referring to what you've said, that the brain is so developed at that point that's, if it's not happened by then you're sort of, as you said, swimming against the tide.
Like you can make impressions, you can certainly help developments, but it's largely who a person is. It's 7 to 10, really, 7 to 10 years of age. That's their personality for life. Now, how a person thinks and feels, you can certainly influence how they act.
Yeah.
But for me, where it's at the kids. It's with kids, working with kids, because you can change society by working with kids, not necessarily by working with adults. And I just think that we need to take one of Brett Klicker's expressions, and it's something that I'm already doing, but I love his phrase, extend your influence. I think you can extend your influence beyond the sporting arena much easier with the young athletes. All my athletes, and this is not just Taekwondo, I actually won't work with any athlete if they're not making their bed, cleaning their room, doing other chores that the parents would like them to do within reason.
Yeah.
But that's the deal. When we do an assessment, I know you're going to ask me about assessments later, but after we do that first get together and we have a chat and so on and look at how they're moving, and I'll ask them, what's your commitment level of achieving your goals? Whatever they said their goal was in sport. On a scale of 1 to 10, what is your commitment level? And usually they'll say 7 or an 8, and they're pretty committed. But then I'll tell them, okay, if you want me to work with you, and I can help you, I won't work with you if I can't help you. If I work with you, I want you to do this, 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 and this to help your parents. And then I'll ask them again, how committed are you? It's the real litmus test, I think. And if they'll step up, and I'll check in with the parents every week, is Johnny, making his bed still and keeping the room tidy and, someone helping out at home. And if they're doing that, what they've learned to do is take responsibility for themselves. Because one thing that I see, that's very common now, especially in team sports, is there's a dearth of leaders on the pitch, in my opinion. And when we have a world with such a lack of leadership, well, who's the world going to listen to? Is it going to listen to people who can't make their own bed? If you're going to take responsibility for a team and you want to have influence, you have to start taking responsibility for yourself. And that's a big part of my coaching process.
That's brilliant. And to reference one of the authors or books we were speaking about off air, Dan John's got a thing where he says to people who ask him for a training program, do you floss your teeth? And they'll sort of look at him and be like, what does this have to do with training? He's like, if you can't commit 2 minutes a day to doing something that is good for you, why am I going to waste my time writing a 12-week program that's going to be hard in the assumption that you're going to somehow find the mental energy to commit to that?
Brilliant. I hadn't heard that one. Brilliant. It's also attention to detail, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. When it comes to programming for youth athletes, and I use that word very loosely because I've certainly made the mistake of going too structured too soon. But even simple things like, for example, if we're doing hands elevated press ups or some form of TRX straight leg inverted row, I'll say to them, right, we need to note the notch height that the bar is in the rack, because that's going to make things difficult. We need to note how far away your feet are from the wall. And recently I posted on my Instagram that I basically a picture of some torn up programs, because I said to my youth athletes, I said, what do we think about the programs? And they basically, alluded to the fact that they were getting in the way. And to be brutally honest, I agree with them as well. I was like, actually, me making you fill out more paperwork is just making this like yet another academic lesson, and we need to be moving. We need to be having fun.
Oh, 100%. And here's the reality of it. With coaching young athletes, they have to be having fun. It's actually one of the biggest reasons why children drop out of sports, because they're not having fun. If they're being trained like many adults, they're not going to last.
On the subject of being trained with many adults, we spoke earlier in the podcast about the complexities of actually training young athletes. So this is going to be a two-part question. Is one, to people who either don't work with young athletes or perhaps aren't aware of the science of training youth athletes, what complexities do exist in regards to not treating them like mini adults? And the second part of the question is, where do you see practitioners going wrong when it comes to potentially overcomplicating training for kids?
Okay, that's a great question. Okay, I think the biggest complexity really in dealing with children is that no 2 days are the same for children. Their bodies are in this constant flux. especially, you know, around puberty. So, but even right throughout their teenagers, you know, they may still have more growth to come. If they're late developers, are going to see growth at any point. So all the time we're taking into factor their hormones can be changing, their moods, their center of gravity is changing as they grow. It's one of the things we really have to watch out for, is this constant flux to deal with kids. The second part of the question was, oh yeah, well, and of course adults, well, once they're fully grown, you're fully grown. You can get stronger and so on, but, you know, generally speaking, you don't have those issues, you know. What was the second part again?
The second part was, where do you feel people overcomplicate it when it comes to training youth athletes?
Okay. It comes back down there, just giving them too much to think about. Yes, definitely we can overcoach and too many cues. I like to give them one, at most two things to think about when we're working on anything. Let's say I'm working on a squat. Maybe I just want them to keep their knees in line with their toes. Maybe that's it. If their body's dropping too much, if I've got one thing I want them to focus on, I'm going to stick to that one thing today. I don't care what else happens. I don't care if their heels lift up. If it's the one thing I want to focus on, I'm going to focus on that one thing. The next session, I'm going to correct, you know, something else. I want to just keep it simple. You know, that expression, KISS.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, stupid. You know, keep it simple, and make it fun. If they're having fun, they're going to be engaged. They're going to engage in the process with you. They're going to buy into what you're doing with them, but only if they're having fun and enjoying it. If it's a labor, it's not going to happen. They might be really motivated. They might want to, you know, in my case, they might want to play soccer for Ireland. But if it's an 11-year-old, I mean, come on. In 14, they might want to play tennis.
Yeah.
So, you know, I want to have it fun. I want to keep them training with me for as long as possible, that I can influence them for life, not just for soccer. I want to prepare them for everything, you know, for any sport. If they want to climb Mount Everest, you know, we lost 2 Irish climbers this week to Everest. May they rest in peace. But just to give you an example, you know, I want them to be able to do whatever it is that they want to take up in older, you know, later in life. So whether it's bungee jumping, something crazy like skydiving, the body is there to be explored. Let's explore it young, and let's maximize their abilities. Can't do that with an adult, not so much. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
By the time you're working with an adult, especially if they're in an elite level, that they want to focus on one thing, and that's the sport they're currently doing. That's it. But with kids, everything is on the table. I want to prepare them that they could change their mind to take up a different sport in the next couple of years. And as I said, you know, moving for life is my motto.
And going back to like preparing them for everything, I would say that sports specificity is one of perhaps the most misunderstood or bastardized terms. How do you deal with, for example, parents who bring their child to you and say, right, bringing Johnny to you, he's a soccer player or whatever, we want to get him better at soccer. And how do you deal with parent expectation, Johnny's expectation, while still getting what you feel is needed in the program in terms of keeping these movement options on the table?
Funnily enough, I haven't run into that challenge much with parents. They tend to trust me. I'm lucky in that I've built enough of, or this is going to sound aristocratic now, after all we were saying earlier, but this is the truth. I think I've built up a good enough reputation locally that by the time a parent comes to me, they've already heard enough good stuff that they trust me. So I don't run into that too much with parents. Now, when I've worked with some amateur youth level teams in the last few years, what can often happen is the skills coach of the teams can interfere in the training process a little bit more. And that's only because they don't quite understand the process. Like I could be doing some speed training, and the coach could be seeing the kids are resting in between sprints. And because the children aren't out of breath, they don't understand that when you're doing speed training, you want zero fatigue. So I'm giving them that recovery time where maybe we're doing a little bit of active rest, but they're getting a recovery before we do our next rep. And I've had them coming up and maybe saying, listen, could you, maybe get them doing something else, push-ups or something in between or whatever. Or it's, they're not working hard enough, but they're thinking conditioning.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, I'm doing some speed drills here. I'm going to do what it says in the tin. I want them to get their speed result. I'm not trying to run them into the ground. And so what I don't get it from parents, I have got it from team coaches over the years. That's just one example.
So, really good example there, where they're looking at your drill and thinking, conditioning, but this isn't hard enough. My drills are way harder. Whereas you're looking at it and saying, right, this is a speed day. Another, as well as sports specificity, I find another term which in my head should be so simple, but isn't, is the word fitness. So my first question is, how do you define fitness? And my second question is, how do you educate or differentiate between a term like fitness versus physical literacy? Okay.
Well, let's start off with, okay, so you asked about a definition. So let's give it a definition, albeit general. So look, we know physical literacy, it's the ability to accomplish a wide range of tasks with competence, with confidence, and physical fitness is more to do with, increasing your strength or health through exercise. And while this isn't a very popular thing to hear, I do like to make people realize that exercise is healthy, sport not necessarily so. Sport isn't always exercise. Sport can be very stressful. And because it's competitive, it can drive people to, to lengths that they wouldn't ordinarily go to if they were just exercising for health. So that being said, physical literacy, when I am working with kids, just because they're playing soccer doesn't mean I won't have them dribbling a ball like a basketball player, throwing and catching, climbing, getting down on the ground, getting back up, rolling. I want them to be able to do everything, and do it with reasonable confidence, because at the end of the day, they may want to go and actually play those games or whatever, with friends. And the more confident that they are, the more likely they're willing to try new things. And we were mentioning off air about one of the biggest challenges with coaching adults is the older we get, the more afraid we are of trying new things, because maybe we just don't think we can, or we don't want to be embarrassed or whatever. But if we can coach kids to expand their comfort zones, get used to being uncomfortable and trying new things, well, I think that is not really another definition for physical literacy. Being willing to try new physical movements, even if they're not familiar with you. Because yes, okay, it's harder to learn new things, after myelination, but it can be done. But the first thing we have to overcome is, are we going to give it a try?
Oh, that's brilliant. Like in terms of the young girls that I work with in my current role, you'll present a new movement task, and typically I'll present it and say, look, I'm not going to coach it. I'm just going to see how you get on with it. Here's the task. And those who tend to have better levels of what we would call physical literacy are more than happy to give it a go. Those who are perhaps not as physically literate as the other girls, they will tend to ask me questions and be like, right, so the hands move like this or the feet move like this. And they're almost trying to decompartmentalize it, if that word makes sense, make myself feel very more clever than I am. But yeah, those who have good physical literacy will tend to go bang into a task. And if it's not quite right, they'll be like, right, okay, I'll change it. Or they've got the perceptual awareness to be like, I move like this, but maybe I should try it like this.
Yes, absolutely. Again, yeah, absolutely. I mean, their confidence in themselves that even if it's new, be able to be willing to give it a go. We're opening up a whole new world for those kids / young adults and then older adults, The other part of the question you were asking there was about fitness.
Yes.
And of course, so look, we defined fitness, but fitness is extremely specific, isn't it? It's fit for a specific purpose. But I do tend to hear, the word fitness being thrown about as in terms of just general stamina and running about a football pitch.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that I do almost call it cardio training, if you like, with young kids.
Yeah.
Because their energy systems is predominantly aerobic anyway. And I find that if I get them moving more efficiently, they tend to look much fitter in their matches and in their training. And it regularly happens. So the analogy I use always is when a new kid's working with me, okay, first, before we're going to try and build you a bigger engine, we're going to make sure that you're not pressing down on the brakes. So if they've got poor motor control or very poor core stability, poor mobility, these are all issues that I like to overcome with them kind of early on. And then I like to build in some strength as well, because strength trumps almost everything with kids. And what happens is that usually after as quick as 2, 3, 4 weeks, the parents coming back to me and saying, yeah, his hurling coach or his soccer coach has just been saying, he's looking fitter already. I haven't done any major kind of stamina work with him. But what I've done is, because they're moving more efficiently, they're just using less energy to get the same job done, so they have more reserves.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's the reason why I asked you to define the terms is just because we've all been in situations where, for example, a coach, a parent, whoever it may be, will say, Johnny, I'm going to keep using that name, sorry, little Johnny's not fit. And you're like, how do you define fitness? Because his ability to do said task may be limited by the fact, as you said, he's still got the handbrake on, or he doesn't know how to steer the vehicle of his own body.
Yeah, absolutely. And the comparison that I make myself is, a marathon runner versus a sprinter. Who's fitter? They're both fit for their sport.
Yeah.
You could ask the question, who's healthier?
Yeah.
That's a different question entirely. And that's a question we don't ask often enough. Who's healthier?
No, not at all. And going back to your sport and exercise debate, I think his name's James O'Keefe, but I'll have to double check. I've not just plucked that out of thin air. But he was testing blood profiles within, not blood profiles, sorry. He was testing something to do with the heart in marathon runners, and basically found that consistently that certain heart cells were basically dying off, and the marathon itself is just so stressful that even though we see this person who's completed 26.2 miles, and yes, they're fit for the task of running the marathon, but are they healthy? And, as you said, it's controversial because the instant question in response to that would be like, oh, what would you rather this person do? Sit on the sofa and do nothing? And it's like, that's not what I said, but let's actually look at this as a whole rather than that isolated sporting environment.
I know. It's an interesting debate I come across all the time, about, the kids are coming in and they've got their heart set on excelling in a particular sport. And, I want to arm them with as broad a range of movement skills and competencies as possible. And then sky's the limit.
Yeah. And in terms of diving a little bit deeper into what those competencies are. So we as strength and conditioning coaches, we might say, right, it's squat, hinge, push, pull, brace, land, rotate, whatever. You've spent the weekend having Brett Clicker over in Galway, and you talked a lot about the perceptual motor skills. So my first question is, for those of listeners who aren't familiar with perceptual motor skills, what are they? And my second question is, why are they so important?
Okay, that's a cracking question, actually. Thank God I did the course and paid attention. Okay, so we think of the fundamental movement skills like squat, lunge, and all these things as being the foundation for everything else. But in reality, we have to go another layer deeper and think about as you said, the perceptual motor skills. So visual, temporal, which is an understanding of rhythm and timing, proprioceptive, sense of direction, sense of relationship between you and other bodies or obstacles. And a child's understanding of these is critical in terms of being able to move well and deal with obstacles and really be, for example, if you say to a child, hinge your hips, what if they don't know where their hips are? What if they don't know what that hinge means? So being able to understand the relationship of their body, just, bending your knees, straighten your knees, soft knees, showing them the understanding of how their body works. Okay, understanding left, right. Can they cross the midline? Can they move their right arm across the midline to their left side of their body? Or are they having to rotate their body to get there? All these things. Can they tune into the sound of something? Getting them to close their eyes and listen for a click of the fingers or a clap. All these different things. They're all relative to being able to perform in sports and just to be healthy anyway. And one analogy that I use all the time is that, we think about being able to do big movements like, say, bench press or squat. And then we say, okay, well, we need to be able to do unloaded movements first. But the perceptual motor skills prop the whole lot up. And just like a brick wall, if you have a solid row of bricks at the bottom, it's going to hold up the rest of the wall. But here's the thing, if you don't have that good foundation, you can keep loading the top of the wall, eventually the whole lot's going to come down like a house of cards. But if you keep adding on to the bottom, even if you are a very accomplished athlete, you can still improve those perceptual motor skills. And here's the thing, if you add extra bricks to the bottom of that wall, you're still going to make it stronger at the top. But you can't keep adding indefinitely at the top without strengthening the foundation.
That makes a lot of sense. I wish I could remember whose quote it is, but the one I like is, the wider the base, the bigger the pyramid, which if you imagine just chucking bricks on and then like a house of cards, Jenga, whatever, it all just falls to pieces.
Yeah, and I was going to actually say that as well. What a lot of people are doing is it's like Jenga, because if we know if you don't use it, you lose it. I'm not sure how much that applies to the perceptual motor skills, but let's say it doesn't hurt to cover our base and keep working on it. And all we need to do is we can develop these things through gameplay. And that is the core of Brett's Spider Fit Kids program, is using gameplay to develop these perceptual motor skills. And I have to say the system is genius. So let's say that if we neglect these things as we get older, well, maybe it is like Jenga. Maybe we're kind of pulling a brick out here or there and trying to put it on top. And the whole lot, can come down eventually. Because look, we do see some absolutely wonderful players who are not good athletes. Who are just, we say, oh, it's bad luck. They're always getting injured. Is it always bad luck?
Yeah. I always think if someone, I don't know, even in rugby, if someone absolutely clatters you, yeah, there might not be anything you can do about it. But my sort of S&C brain thinks, right, if you were more attuned to, for example, the perceptual skills, and you spotted him running half a second earlier, or, for example, you had more efficient movements so you could avoid the tackle.
Yes.
Obviously, some things like, you happen to get hit by a car, then there's not really much that perceptual motor skills and strength can do in the way of that. But yeah, the bad luck example, I think, only relates to such a small fraction of cases. And one that made me laugh is, I won't mention the footballer's name, but I remember reading in the Evening Standard a couple of years ago, and they said that this player just had terribly bad luck and just kept getting injured in the same place. And I was like, you don't think that the first injury was never rehabilitated properly, or there was something underlying, and bad luck versus continually injuring the same site? Like, that's indicative that on some sort of level there's a problem there.
Absolutely. And I don't have any insight into the sports rehabilitation of, say, a major professional club, but I do often, I see it in the amateur level, and a lot of time people are involved in the rehabilitation profession, like physiotherapists or whatever. They tend, because they're allopathically trained, they can often tend, and I don't want to tar everyone with the same brush now, but I'm just thinking in general, they can tend to focus on the site of injury. Let's say it's a knee. But what if that time spent during rehabilitation was spent doing a whole holistic rehabilitation? That not only were we going to work on rebuilding the knee, But let's look at all those perceptual skills that we could be building. You could be sitting down, getting work, and then you're getting a massage in your quads, whatever. But you could be lying down with your eyes closed and trying to identify sounds. So you could be training your oral skills. There's so much that you could be doing to develop the all-around athlete.
Yeah, and certainly ways you could make it a lot more, I mean, again, not to stereotype, but on the whole, if you said to an athlete, right, what would you rather do, your sport or rehab? Obviously, fundamentally, they would say their sport, and they would say they enjoy their sport a lot more. But the practitioners I really like to follow are the ones who are integrating those perceptual motor skills early, if for nothing else, other than to get the athlete, one, connected to the longer term goal of where that rehab's going, but two, just to keep them engaged. And I think it's Ben Rosenblatt or some other practitioner who said injuries are opportunities, but keep it fun. Let's keep them connected to the sport. And if possible, keep them connected to the whole reason they're seeing you in the first place, which is on some level, shape or form to get better at their sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, when we talk about injuries as well, and like, so many injuries are called non-contact injuries are caused by change of direction.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of topical now because I'm a Liverpool fan. But when I look at Lionel Messi and the things that man does with his body, and how many players change direction as often as him?
Yeah.
And as effortlessly as him, but yet he does it so gracefully, and rarely seems to hurt himself doing it.
No,
whatever he developed, and he was a late developer, incidentally, which is I think was worth mentioning.
Yeah,
the best soccer player in the world was a late developer. I mean, he obviously developed, an ability to move that allowed him to. He's like he soars, isn't it?
Yeah, just so graceful. Again, to quote Dan John again, I think his last or the third principle in his philosophy is to strive for mastery and grace. And regardless of how strong you are, and another quote, I think it's Charlie Francis, if it looks right, it flies right. And he uses it to describe, if you know nothing about athletics and you go to an athletics meet, you can probably pick out who the winner's going to be just because their movement is just so graceful and efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at the perceptual and motor skills, let's stick with Messi for a moment. If you look at the perceptual and motor skills on display when he is playing, okay, relationship. He knows where every other player is. Spatial awareness. He knows where the space is to move into. Temporal and rhythm. He always gets the right touch. That's something else. But in terms of, when he receives the ball, he almost never has a bad first touch. So he knows the exact amount of force to just put on that ball to receive it. Okay, his rhythm when he's dribbling is just phenomenal. Oral will have to just kind of guess at that one. Visual, I mean, come on. I mean, that free kick against Liverpool in the first leg, was just insane. So, but these are all those perceptual motor skills. They're there for us to see if we're looking for them, instead of just looking at what he's doing with the ball. It's everything that leads up to that ability.
Yeah, and in regards to the perceptual motor skills, I always think of extreme examples from sports. So if you take a footballer doing an overhead kick, like there's so much going on there. You've got to visually track the ball. You've got to be able to position your body in a way that you're going to make contact with the ball whilst having the proprioceptive awareness of being upside down. There's just so much going on. But off the back of the comments you've made, looking into the perceptual motor skill stuff has really challenged me as a practitioner to think, yes, we know strength's important and it's easy to quantify. And in that regards, it's very seductive in the sense of I can keep improving it, I can keep tabs on it, but surely our goal as practitioners is to improve the ability of an athlete to influence play in their chosen sport. And going back to Messi, if you got given an athlete and said, right, you can either have an athlete or a footballer, just because we're using that example, who knows where his body is in time and space, who knows the right amount of force to put on the ball, who has the peripheral vision or visual awareness to pick that pass, versus an athlete, for example, who jumps high, sprints well. And yes, those things are definitely important, but you can't really have one without the other. And actually, in strength and conditioning, it's easy to think, right, our role is just this physical thing over here, rather than, as you said, developing the whole athlete so that they can actually utilize those physical skills effectively by having all these perceptual motor skills built up alongside it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think we can ask ourselves the question, we can, you know, is he just a genius, or has he got acutely developed perceptual motor skills?
Yeah. It's one of the reasons why. So I've been looking at a load of the School of Calisthenics stuff. I think they do a great job. And it's got me thinking, like, how many different movement situations can you put an athlete in, and how can you appropriately scale that to develop both the physical and the perceptual motor skills you're after. On that subject, I just realized I was just enjoying the chat so much I've almost gone completely off piste. But what would your assessment process be like, either for a very young athlete or for just assessing how developed or underdeveloped an athlete's perceptual motor skills are?
Okay, funny enough, you actually pinned it down to the perceptual motor skills. So I was actually about to say that it's often, sometimes it's qualitative. In other words, I want to see how well they're moving in general. And sometimes it's quantitative. I feel they're moving well enough that it's worth measuring.
Yeah.
So, if it's a young child, I'm going to be looking at locomotion. So I want to see, skipping, various different crawling patterns, and seeing how I want to see them going forwards, backwards, sideways, hopping bilaterally and unilaterally. I'm really looking to see what their proprioception is like, and their ability to even be their spatial awareness going backwards. Everything that we do forwards, we do going backwards. I was helping somebody drive years ago, and I was teaching him to drive in reverse around the car park. Back then, supermarkets weren't open on a Sunday. My explanation, why am I driving around this car park backwards? My answer was, if you can drive around this backwards and know what you're doing, forwards is going to be a piece of cake.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at jumping mechanics. I want to see how well they can land before I see how high they can jump. If they can't land, we're not going to do too much jumping yet. Squat, a lot of this will be going through basic movements. The overhead squat I find a very useful one to look at. Just give them a dowel. So there's very load, but it really does challenge, their motor skills to see if they can overhead squat. And I just want to look and see what's happening there. I don't make a big deal of the assessment process. I just make a game of it,
Yeah.
We'll throw and catch a ball. I want to see what they can do with their right hand and left hand. We'll go small to a table tennis ball, right up to a kind of half-size football. Kick. Just want to see what their direction, sense of direction, their power. We'll, throw some sandbells a little bit overhead. I'm going to look at everything, rotation, and it's a lot of it is to do with manipulation as well as locomotion. So hopefully that just gives you a good overview. There's a lot in there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. No, I think it's spot on. In terms of the qualitative assessment, it never ceases to amaze me when I'll be taking young athletes for a warm up and I'll be like, right, we're just going to backpedal or jog backwards, and they're like, oh, backpedal? What does that mean? And in my head, I'm like, what do you mean? What's a backpedal? Or what do you mean jogging backwards? It's like, but as you've noted in the various blogs that I've read of yours, motor skills are declining rapidly. And as Brett Clicker in one of his blogs or one of his videos says, that in previous years gone by, this would just be, it wouldn't be a strength and conditioning coach's role per se. It wouldn't be a physical educator's role per se. The fact that kids would play would just develop these skills by themselves. You felt passionate enough to help out a school that's local to you in terms of donating your time. What was it that made you want to actually take action rather than, for example, bemoaning lack of physical skills or movement skills on social media?
A few years ago, I realized that I had, I suppose, a combination of a passion for and an affinity for working with kids. So that's why I decided to specialize in that area. And so, you know, most of my clients would be age kind of between 7 up to 15, 16. But as more and more new clients were coming into me, I was realizing that as they were getting older, that there was a real drop in the level of movement ability. And I just was just sitting there one evening and I just said, well, there's no point in going on Facebook and giving out about it and just sitting here and you know, and brooding about it. So I said, look, be the change you want to see in the world. So I started getting onto primary schools and I offered out my services to them. And I just said, look, this is who I am. This is what I do. I'm seeing an issue with children's health deteriorating because of just lack of structured play anymore, or unstructured play and structured PE. So I offered my services. 5 schools turned me down. They just said, oh no, we're grand. I was shocked, but they did. And then one school, which could have been a school to turn me down because they do quite a lot of sport, so it wouldn't have surprised me if they felt they were doing well. But no, the principal was unbelievably open-minded. She loved the idea. We had to do a few things like, you know, make sure that, you know, I was the Garda vetted here. And once, you know, yes, I'm already Garda / police vetted. So insurance, once all those things were in place, we started. And I'm so glad I did this because I videoed the first few months of it. And then I left a gap and I videoed the last few weeks. And I also got everybody to answer a questionnaire at the start and at the end about how they felt they were. Now, it was a subjective questionnaire, obviously, how they were sleeping and things like that. Do you feel restless in class and so on? And I actually have enough information to make a documentary, I think, out of it if somebody was interested. But in the space of 3 months, all the children were sleeping better on the day I was there. So I was only there once a week, but the day I was there, they reported they were sleeping better that night. The teachers reported that they had improved attention span in class and they were less restless on the day I was there. Yes, it carried over to the next day, but then it kind of wore off, which goes to show they need to be doing this more than once a week.
Yeah.
And so I worked with a 3rd class, which would kind of be age kind of 8 to 9. Before up to from September to December, and then January through to the summer term in June, I worked with 6th class. And you know what? It was a great experience for me. The kids had a lot of fun. It was a big class. There was 35 or so children in each class. So what I did was I divided it into 2, and I just did 2 separate sessions with each of them. And I'm glad I did that because they got so much more face time from me.
Yeah. And what I like that you've shown there is, from, for example, a strength and conditioning perspective, or a strength and conditioning coach going into school, shall I say, it's very easy to measure metrics in things that we know we should be. So I don't know, jump height or distance, rep maxes, whatever. But actually schools, one, not saying they don't care, but that's not the language they're going to speak. Whereas if you're having that greater impact, as you said throughout the entire podcast, sleeping better, more attentive lessons, you're literally putting their brains in a better situation where they can take on new information more readily. That's the sort of stuff that schools care about. And that's probably what's going to get stakeholder buy-in, especially when it comes to, for example, and this is my next question, I suppose, is especially when it comes to differentiating the services you provide versus, say, I don't know, just a keep fit type class, or, you know, a conditioning class, or just simply another after school activity.
Okay, and what's the actual question?
So the question is, how do you, or I'll give a little sort of preface first, is a lot of times, or sometimes what I've done with athletes, to the untrained eye, it looks like we're just having games or just having fun.
Yeah.
Whereas there's obviously method in the madness in terms of perceptual motor skills, manipulation, stabilization, locomotion. How do you educate / describe your services so that a school, for example, doesn't say, thank you very much, Shane, but we've already got that in place? Does that make more sense?
Okay, it does. I'm not so sure it's applicable to me. I could give you a hypothetical.
Yeah, that'll do.
I'll give you a hypothetical. Yeah, I would say to them that because children aren't allowed to have the free play anymore, like I'll remind, we're dealing with adults here, that, you know, so I'm going to remind them, hey, do you remember when we were kids? We used to climb walls, climb trees, hang off branches, fall down, roll around, kick balls, throw balls, and there was no adult standing over us telling us how to do it. That's how we learned to move and explore our environment. Kids aren't allowed to do this anymore. What I am offering is a gameplay based activity where they will have loads of fun and learn all this stuff without actually realizing it, through me giving them guided games in certain ways. So for instance, we could be doing a game of tag, and they're learning how to do speed and agility there. But if I want them to do variations like dodgeball, they're throwing, they're dodging. If I want them to free somebody by crawling through their legs, they're getting down and getting back up again. All these different things I can challenge the kids with through gameplay.
That's absolutely brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. You've certainly sold me, even if we are preaching to the choir. My next question relates to, so one thing I've certainly learned from PE teachers and through my role teaching PE this year, which I haven't got from strength and conditioning, is the idea of differentiation. Now, when I first started teaching PE, my sort of limited understanding of it was just, you're just simply progressing and regressing something so it's relevant to the person that's doing it. But in PE, you obviously get a far bigger range, or typically tend to get a far bigger range, because it's compulsory that the kids are there, rather than, for example, kids who love Taekwondo and turn up at one of your sessions because they've already got a vested interest. So how do you manipulate your games, whether it's dodgeball, tag, or whatever, to ensure that even the pupils who perhaps have lower levels of physical literacy are still being challenged relative to their capabilities, as well as the ones who, for example, maybe they play multiple sports and dodgeball for them is just, you know, a walk in the park?
That's a great question, Todd. Okay. I find that virtually every game can be simplified, you know, to include everybody. If it's a game, I would like to start it at the lowest level. And then what I can do is, if I see a few children that I know are capable for more challenges, what I'll do is, rather than telling the children I need to regress and drawing attention to them, I'll start the game at the lowest level, and I'll find the children that need more challenge, and I'll go to them, and I'll say, okay, you, instead of maybe running around, I want you hopping on one leg, whatever it might be, and I will challenge them that way. Now, I don't have a specific game in mind right now, but hopefully that kind of gives you an idea.
No, that's great, because I think oftentimes, or certainly in my experience, like, kids aren't stupid. Like, for example, if you have, I don't know, 4 tennis courts, 4 lessons, and you're like, oh, this group go here, this group go here, this group go here. And I have a kid say to me, is this the bottom court? And like, they're not stupid. They know that, for example, they're with people of similar ability, and they've walked past the people on the top court, and they can see that they're better. But I like things which, as you said, the kids don't know or aren't necessarily going to sit there and think that hopping's more difficult than running. They're just enjoying themselves and having fun. And to them, it's not better or worse. It's just different.
Yeah, absolutely. And now one of the strategies that I do use is that I will get into the children into groups. So if I've got, say, 30 in a group, and I would say, right, we're going to group up, you know, and we'll use a game like, Wolf Attack or something like that. You know, you're going to get gobbled up if you don't get into a group of 5 very quickly. And I say, group of 5. And now I don't have to take responsibility for grouping the children. They are only too excited to get themselves into groups, you know, and not be the one that's left out and gobbled up by the wolf or the shark, or choose your predator of choice.
Yeah.
Once I have them in groups, then I'm going to actually say, okay, you guys, we've got 5 minutes. Any game you want to play, this is your area. I'll give each of them their own area. But the difference is I haven't grouped them by ability. What I have done is I've just grouped them. And they're all going to be similar ages anyway. But because they now have a collective say on the game, and it's not just me, I'm reasonably confident that all the children will be able to have a say in what they're doing in the rules so that they can all participate. And I haven't noticed a problem yet, and I've been doing this for years, whereby somebody was just totally left out because they weren't able to participate in a game that they had a say in choosing.
Yeah, yeah. I typically find that, and I'm sure you do the same, that actually kids are more socially aware than we perhaps give them credit for.
Oh, 100%. Oh, if we stayed out of it more often, the kids would be fine. Truthfully, yeah, we need to make sure nobody jumps out a window or something crazy or runs into the brick wall. We need to be there to supervise for safety. But if we actually stopped organizing their games a little bit and just let them off and give them that creativity, they'll shock us with how creative they can be and how much fun they can have if we'll allow them to.
Oh, absolutely. And on the sort of social, psychosocial development, again, mentioning Dan John, he's got some really interesting thoughts on the negatives of early specialization, which I've not heard before. And he gave the account of, for example, when you're kids and you are designing a game with no adults, you've got to referee it. You've got to decide who's on whose team. You've got to decide how you might make it fair if, I don't know, one team's got 5, one team's got 4. You've got to come to a decision if, I don't know, you're playing soccer, football, whatever, and you think it's a penalty or you think it went on the inside of the jumper. They don't think it did. And actually those social skills are only going to happen if we're out of the way. Whereas if there's an adult there who's like, no, that was a penalty, or no, that was a foul. Like, as you said, sometimes us as practitioners are actually the thing getting in the way of the kid or the athlete developing.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I tell you this one, you know, the swimming noodles.
Yes, waddles.
Yeah, these long foam things. So I always keep them in the Taekwondo school because they're great for you know, you can make kind of hurdles and stuff. They're soft, nobody hurts themselves. So, you know, if I say, right, you know what, we've got these noodles, we've got cones, what do you want to play? Anything. Now they could use those noodles for so many different things. Do you know what they want to do? A noodle war.
Yeah.
They actually want to pick these things up and flake each other with them. And, you know, one of the things that Brett Clicker was talking about the weekend was that aggressiveness is increasing in older children in the States at the moment, because he's saying that they have less tactile awareness. So because rough housing seems to be getting banned over there more and more, children now aren't developing this tactile awareness of what's safe contact and what's not safe contact. So they're beginning to react aggressively to almost any contact. So, you know, now I've got these children here and they're just attacking each other with these noodles. They're not going to do any harm to each other, but for them, that is fun.
Yeah.
That is fun, that rough play. And it is insane to think that we're taking that away from children.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can't remember if it was your channel or somebody else's channel I watched where kids were literally wrestling. And I was like, well, you almost by thinking, oh, somebody's going to get hurt. It's like, oh, well, don't climb a tree in case you fall down. It's like, well, the kid will, whether they can verbalize it or not, they'll learn why they fell down. Or whether it's wrestling, they'll intuitively work out what is a more advantageous position to put their body in. And I'm sure it's Brett Clicker's stuff where I've seen where he said that with the tactile awareness decreasing, kids struggle to differentiate between, for example, a friendly touch like a hug, a pat on the back, versus, as you said, an aggressive touch, whether it's, you know, trying to Taekwondo, boxing, or, you know, whatever. And their motor response to that, emotionally and physically, is just inappropriate.
Yes, and it's trying to process all the sensory information that's coming at them. Is this comfortable? Is this uncomfortable? What is going on here? I don't know. And yeah, we need to let children explore all that. And
in regards to your going almost full circle back to your Taekwondo, how important do you think it is that strength conditioning coaches have coaching experience that is outside of lifting?
In Taekwondo or in
any sport? Any sport.
I think it is essential, to be honest with you. I think the more limited your scope is, it comes back to if your only tool is a hammer, everything's a nail.
Yeah.
You know, the more I'll be honest with you. I look back to a year or two ago even, and I kind of say to myself, God, I was a terrible instructor back then. This constant self-evaluation, that am I getting better? And one of the reasons that I'm getting better is that because my kids are teaching me. Now, how are they teaching me? They're teaching me because they're coming to me with problems to solve, and I need to find cues or some kind of guidance to help them overcome a movement issue. And so often it happens, well, I've used this cue, I've used this, and nothing has helped. So now I have to get creative, and I literally have to solve that problem. And the more experience that I have as a coach of disciplines, of not just sports, but all the possibilities of movement, enables me to actually solve that child's problem.
Yeah.
But they've started the process with me by coming to me with something that I can't solve immediately. I really have to reach inside and get creative. And that now means that, okay, next time I meet a child with this issue, I've got another option, another way to solve that issue. And so coaches that are limited in their scope and their experience, it's just going to be that much harder for them to be creative.
Oh, absolutely. And even, for example, coaching some sports like athletics, like stuff like sprints, fairly comfortable with. Like, its speed tends to be, within UKSCA or whatever assessment. But for example, teaching the javelin, I'm like, right, okay, my shoulders don't quite get in the position when I do it quickly. And one of my colleagues was talking me through javelin, and we were going super, super slow and even doing positions isometrically. And all of a sudden my brain clicked. And I was like, this must be what it's like when, you're teaching, I don't know, a young athlete to squat or whatever. You've tried every cue. And as you said, the body just can't hear you. And for me, it's about realizing the more sports I teach or try and learn myself, you realize in terms of that general movement toolbox, sports are more similar than they are different. Yes, obviously they'll all have their own nuances. And for example, a crossover step in, say, throwing the javelin versus tennis is slightly different. But you realize, actually, if you've got that general movement toolbox, then, as you said, approaching sport or physical activity, you're just going to feel a lot more confident and competent with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more experience, you don't have to be, look, nobody's an expert in everything.
No.
But if you have some experience of different disciplines, it just allows you to, not always to be creative, but you can find analogies, to help with somebody. Like, for example, I was doing some sandball slams against a wall with a teenager the other day. And there was such a deficit when he was rotating from right to left compared to left to right. And he wants to be a professional soccer goalkeeper, but he loves golf as well. So this 15-year-old is playing golf, and I'm trying to give him a reason for working on his weaker side. And okay, I don't like golf myself, but at least I've seen enough to know how the swing works. So I have to find something that he can relate to give him a reason to work on something he couldn't be bothered doing at home. So I'm talking about his golf swing and just explaining, okay, you're driving. At some point, are you going to stop that club? Are you going to stop your swing? Or are you just going to rotate forever more? He goes, no, you have to stop. And he's thinking about Tiger Woods. And so I said, okay, so what do you think you're doing? But all those core muscles you're using to generate force to drive that ball. What do you think you're doing to stop? You've got to use muscles to just isometrically rotate almost in the opposite direction. So do you not think that that's going to help you control your swing? And it's just trying to simplify that concept to a teenager to give him a reason to go and work on it. If I have no idea, which is also gives you another reason why you should get to know your athletes.
Yeah.
Because he's coming to me really because he wants to be a goalkeeper. But if I don't converse with him and get to know the boy, I don't know that he likes to play golf as well. And that was a more valuable analogy for him. So, we need to be able to use things that kids can relate to as well, to give them a reason to work on something if need be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one mistake I made in my own coaching career is almost thinking, and again, this might sound counterintuitive when you're working with athletes who are quite high up, but is thinking that every athlete you work with trains with you because they want to improve their sport. And you're there sort of preaching that the benefits of this exercise will help you in this sporting scenario. Whereas with really young athletes, like, they don't care. Not out of a negative way, but they don't care. As you said, they just want to have fun. And if that's disguising movements in there and they're having fun, they might not be able to articulate that the reason they do your sessions is to have fun. But if the stress that training comes with training isn't fun, then, and volume is a key underpinning principle of adaptation, they're just not going to turn up. And as you said, all the physical stimulus is then irrelevant.
Absolutely. And, again, coming back to gameplay, it doesn't even have to be with young kids. All the adults I work with love to play games. If you find me an adult who doesn't enjoy a good game, you won't find one. And it's about how we approach it as well, and because adults like to feel safe. But like, you might remember back to Child Champion 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Some 2 games that I love to play with anybody who's able to do this. It's great for for anti-rotation. Rock, paper, scissors in a press-up position. As soon as they lift that hand off the ground, they have to brace. A wheelbarrow race, lovely, anti-extension exercise, and it's a game. We can do it, we're racing each other, it's good fun. But if you want to make it challenging, hold one leg and let the other leg be free. Now they have a really, really good anti-rotation exercise as well as anti-extension. And these things, we can do so much by disguising it in games.
Yeah, and then you don't have the negative connotations that might or might not come with training, for want of a better word. In wrapping up, obviously we've mentioned like loads of books, resources. Who would you say has had the biggest influence on you as a coach, whether it's someone from your personal life or someone from the coaching field?
It's actually hard to pin it down to one person. I've had a lot of fantastic mentors over the years, I'll be honest with you. There's a gentleman I would like to give a mention to. Okay, do you know what? My dad was a secondary school teacher.
Yeah.
He's had a massive influence on me. He had a passion for teaching. And my mother is also a music teacher. So I think it's probably one of the reasons why I ended up as an instructor.
Makes sense. I
think it's, I don't put everything down to genetics, but, I guess it has to be there in my blood somewhere. Both my parents are teachers in the form. So I know that's what I do as well, so I would say that. And plus they were both very passionate about it. And I saw that.
Yeah.
So I do it because I love it and not just because I'm good at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of coaching, again, I won't force you to pick just one if there's a couple that spring to mind. But if you could spend time observing any coach with his or her athletes, who would you choose to spend time with?
Well, actually, after having Brett Klicka over last weekend, I would say Brett would definitely be a contender for top spot.
Wicked.
Yeah.
And recommended resources, whether it's a book you've recently read, podcast, whatever you would like that recommended resource to be.
Okay, I'll give you a combination. Book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yep, excellent book.
And I would also go with Brett Bartholomew's The Art of Coaching.
Yeah.
I think every coach is well read up on the science stuff. I think we need to, when you bring back the human element into it, you're going to see better results. In terms of educational resources from the strength and conditioning side, I'll give you 2. Rob Anderson's Athletic Evolution is fantastic. He's been in interviews with some fantastic coaches, and I think that's one of the reasons why I would give that one as a great resource, because he's got a very, very good broad range of interviews on it. So, and then Brett Klicka's Spider Fit Kids is one to definitely check out for as well.
Yeah, superb resources there. I mean, I'll link both of those up in the show notes. And penultimate question is, where can people find you or reach out to you?
ShaneFitzgibbon.ie.
Perfect. And as with everything else, I'll chuck it in the show notes. And again, I feel like it's hard to limit it just to one, because I've literally got notes upon notes sat in front of me. But if you had to limit the podcast to one key take home for whether it's coaches, sports teachers or parents, what would you like your one key take home from this episode to be?
Empower the kids you work with.
Beautiful. I absolutely love it, mate. Really appreciate your time, giving up your afternoon, and it's been absolutely brilliant to talk shop.
It's been a real pleasure, Todd. Thanks for having me on.
My absolute pleasure. My absolute pleasure. Take care, mate.
All the best. Cheerio.
Take it easy. Bye.